Hello. Welcome to part 3 of A Spirituality of the Triduum. We come now to a spirituality of Good Friday. We continue the approach we began in part 2, attempting to examine the events of the final days of Jesus' life from the inside out, if you will. On Thursday night, the last night of Jesus' life, he shared Passover with his friends and made the extraordinary step of committing himself to the life-ending events which would follow, essentially to be broken and poured out. Not extraordinary for his divinity, for the divine person, his character was and always would be yes to God, self-surrender to the Father's will. But as a human person, Jesus, this yes bore a cost. Betrayal and abandonment by his closest friends, the pain of torture, the suffering of crucifixion, and finally, death as a humiliated criminal. By literally embarking on the way of the cross, Jesus now lives out the most extreme dimensions of his yes, but also the deepest questions of human experience. Why is there suffering? Why do the good die? Before going further, I want to make a distinction here. Examining the experience of suffering, and yes, it's no secret that we will eventually get to the redemption it brings through Jesus, we cannot generalize to all suffering. If I go celebrating on Friday night, perhaps partake of too much adult beverage, I may be genuinely physically suffering on Saturday morning. But that's pretty explainable, and I have no one to blame but myself. Bad choices rarely, if ever, lead to redemption. But all too often, good choices, God choices, lead to suffering. And that's what we take up here. So that's why this is a Triduum, 3 days. It is the context of Holy Thursday that informs Good Friday. Jesus suffers and dies as a result of his yes to God and to love of others. His commitment to hasten the reign of God now comes due. Now, what I describe here again is a way of understanding the Jesus experience. You may look at it differently. This draws primarily on what theologians call a low Christology, one that proceeds from his experience as a human. Others argue from a high Christology, one that proceeds from his divine nature. Now, from this point of view, what does the experience of Jesus' suffering and death tell us? I think it challenges some of the easy answers that we sometimes settle for. How often, when the good suffer today, do you hear people search desperately for the meaning in it? And while ultimately God is the final cause of all things, not the least of which was endowing his human creation with free will to do good and evil, it seems somewhat disingenuous to me to simplify the suffering of the good and innocent with the belief God wanted it so, or God wanted another angel in heaven, Please take no offense, but I think the Good Friday event challenges us on a deeper level. In Jesus' experience, God simply wanted, and he followed, God's will that all be united in love, in justice, in peace, the kingdom of God itself. But that didn't, and still doesn't in many cases, sit well with some people, often the powerful or self-focused. Their choice is to squash those who would say yes to God. And Jesus is yet another opportunity, perhaps their strongest yet. And for Jesus, this has to hurt. Remember, his divine nature means simply that he is the embodiment of yes. It is to continue to trust in God, for God is indeed trustworthy, worthy of trust. But I don't believe that had to extend to knowing details of how God redeems. How will Daddy catch me in this mess? I'd maintain that if you know everything will work out fine, maybe you're not really suffering. I'm not denying pain, but at the same time, there's a degree of play acting. Real suffering, as Jesus himself experienced first, comes from not knowing how God can save. Is that not the meaning of Jesus' cry from the cross? My God, why have you abandoned me? I think Jesus' suffering and death turns the question of meaning on its head. What if suffering is meaningless? I mean, irrational. Sure, there's causation, the act of evil men, but must it have meaning? The way of the cross is not a philosophy of suffering. It's a way. It's an irrational trust that in ways unseen, unknown, and yes, illogical, Abba will catch me. Remember, God does not take away Jesus' suffering. God instead sends an angel of consolation to accompany him. Using some of our modern phrases, Jesus does not get over death. He goes through it. From the earliest days, this was a challenge. St. Paul expressed it in words such as, "For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." For those who prefer art, there is actually graffiti preserved from the 2nd century Rome, meant to mock an early Christian named Alexamenos. It shows a crucified man with the head of an ass and a young man looking up at it. And scratched in it, next to it, is the phrase, "Alexamenos worships his God." Good God. Yes, God is indeed good. It makes your head want to explode. Perhaps that is why what often fails philosophers, theologians, and yes, even homilists, is often expressed best by poets and troubadours. I've made no secret or apologies for my love of the work of Bruce Springsteen. Catholic by birth, but not a Catholic rock star, many of his songs are still undeniably Paschal in character. Listen to the words of my personal favorite, "The Promised Land." Now, copyright disallows me from playing them here, so I have to read. I've done my best to live the right way. I get up every morning and go to work each day. But your eyes go blind and your blood runs cold. Sometimes I feel so weak, I just want to explode. Explode and tear this whole town apart. Take a knife and cut this pain from my heart. Find somebody itching for something to start. Some expressions taken to the extreme, but nonetheless of that existential experience of suffering when you are simply trying to live the right way. But then the refrain, the dogs on Main Street howl because they understand, if I could reach one moment into my hands, Mister, I ain't a boy. No, I'm a man, and I believe in a promised land. There's the vision, the promise, the trust in God, the promised land of Easter. From this, after some amazing uplifting instrumental solos, the singer describes his path, almost an image of Good Friday, in this final verse. Well, there's a dark cloud rising from the desert floor. I packed my bags and I'm heading straight into the storm. Gonna be a twister to blow everything down that ain't got the faith to stand its ground. Blow away the dreams that tear you apart. Blow away the dreams that break your heart. Blow away the lies that leave you nothing but lost and brokenhearted. And again, the refrain follows. This is the faith, the trust that impels the singer into the storm. I believe in a promised land. Like the experience of Jesus, isn't that third verse in the song irrational? I mean, I lived in Kentucky for 7 years, and the first time that we had a twister warning, we couldn't run to the basement fast enough. I'm from New Jersey. I know toxic waste dumps, not tornadoes. Storms are for running away from, not heading straight into. But only that way, only blowing away every illusion and lie, even into the worst suffering, are we left with the naked trust in Abba. So the refrain comes back, I believe in a promised land. Funny aside, when I was being taken to the OR in 2012 for a double heart bypass, which included a bum gurney wheel, so they asked me if I'd like to walk in. And I did. I walked right into the OR for people to cut me open and stop my heart. I was struggling to find words to pray. My mind went blank until I remember this clear as day. I played this song in my head for my final, hopefully not in an ultimate sense, my final steps. It was my Good Friday prayer on that Johns Hopkins afternoon. Again, I invite you to respond to these thoughts with your own meditation on the Gospels. And again, put yourself into the story to see, hear, feel, taste it. Try to imagine Jesus' experience of agony and the struggle to maintain trust in Abba when it is all clearly coming to an end. What does the experience tell you? So, meaninglessness of suffering and death, feeling abandoned by God, the need for irrational trust. Gee, Bruce, real hopeful message here. I get it. There's nothing uplifting in the Good Friday story. I don't think there should be. It's a story about the cost of saying yes to God in a fallen order. It is suffering and death. But it is not the end of the story. And that, my brothers and sisters, is where our fourth and final part comes in. Hint: believe in a promised land. God bless you.